start. Well, it's more than just personality. We're still talking during the commercial break. It's more than personalities. It's history when it comes to the midterms. Winning is one thing, of course. Governing is another. And some of the hot button issues on the table as we get set for the last 2 years of President Obama's term in the White House include immigration, of course, and the minimum wage. We're back with our distinguished panel to discuss that. We're also joined by John Davenport, Professor John Davenport. He is the Director of Peace and Justice Studies at Fordham University. So you're joining the distinguished panel. Maybe we'll start with you as we get going. Immigration. Everybody wants it, but they can't seem to reach the finish line here.
I think there's a real chance that this might get done this time.
Do you think so?
If the Republicans don't produce something in this area, I think it could really hurt them in 2016. The Democrats will run on that, will make political hay of it. They'll use it to bring much stronger turnout, especially among Hispanic voters at the polls in 2016. And so the Republicans know that there's a danger here. But at the same time, I think Tea Party conservatives like Ted Cruz, there are other people in the Senate that could make this really difficult for Republicans to pass anything.
I was going to bring that up. Yes, I think most Republicans and most Democrats would like some sort of legislation on immigration.
Some compromise, maybe. Yeah.
Although there are these ultra right-wing factions of the Republican Party, you mentioned Senator Ted Cruz and others, who want a fence, who want 24-hour guards, who want helicopters, sensors, and certain landmines, whatever the case may be. How does somebody like John Boehner, how does somebody like Mitch McConnell convince that ultra right-wing part of the party that it makes sense for us to do this because it'll help us in 2016?
I'm not sure that they're going to be able to. That's the real worry. I know there are people in the Republican Party who would like to build a bigger tent, who really want to move this issue. I think it may come down to the leadership just has to put these things up for a vote and even be content in the worst case for them on having it pass the House with more Democrats than Republican votes.
Well,
that's really bad for
Professor
them.
Sanders, we've seen this before. You get somebody like Mark Rubio coming out saying, hey, we need some sort of immigration reform, and he's ostracized by the Tea Party.
That's right.
And he's demonized by the Tea Party.
Yeah, I'm less sanguine than you are about an immigration reform bill. I mean, I think you're right. Politically, it makes sense for the Republicans to produce something. And of course, the Democrats have been in favor of something for a long time. But the devil is in the details. It's the Republicans that are going to be driving the immigration bill, no matter what emerges from the Congress. So they will first have to overcome their internal fight. Right. And then secondly, the content may be content that may not be acceptable to various segments of the Democratic Party. And if Obama signs a bill that is less than satisfactory to the affected constituencies, he may be faced with a difficult choice of vetoing or signing the bill. But either way, the Democrats may suffer.
But isn't half a loaf better than a full loaf?
Well, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. Not if, for instance, the Democratic constituencies think they can win the presidency and therefore have a better bill 2 years hence or a year hence from whenever this bill emerges, if it does emerge from Congress. So I'm not sure that we're going to have a bill. We will certainly have a debate, but I don't know that we will have a bill.
All right, complicating all of this, of course, is Governor Rick Perry of Texas. They have a very long border with Mexico. He wants to be president as well. I'm sure he's going to weigh in some way, shape, or form.
I think Perry, my personal sense is at the end of the day, will shake out and will probably become irrelevant. I think the real interesting person in this is going to be Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush has already come out in favor of immigration reform. He's way out in front of most of the Republicans, but he said he won't run unless he can get the right to support him. So I think that's really where the leverage comes in on the Republican side, because the Republicans would really, I think, like to have Jeb Bush going up against Hillary Clinton. He would be a very effective candidate, but the problem is going to be he won't run if the Republicans won't march with him.
Well, you say that, and it's all very interesting, but I'll go back to what I said, I think, earlier in the show. Don't we have Clinton-Bush fatigue by now?
Well, yes, but it's always the lesser of the two evils. In a two-party system, you don't necessarily have the ones that you want. You have the ones that get there.
Don't you think voters will revolt and say, hey, we've seen the show. We've been to the circus with the Clintons and Bush. I think that's enough. Who else is out there?
Well, there's several people out there, but when you look at the top 10 list that we already have sort of gone over earlier today, without including people like Santorum and some others. Right. I mean, it ends up being basically a field that is rather limited. I mean, we have people, but they're not necessarily, it's not like, it's spring tryouts and everyone gets a chance to go on the field. There's a small group of players. Right. And I think the idea here is that That's why we have this legacies. We went through this Kennedy era where we constantly elected Kennedys. Well, the Bushes and the Clintons, they're in the same realm. And we also have their daughter, who at some point is probably going to be a candidate as well.
Professor Davenport, you see the same thing I'm seeing, obviously. Is there a Republican out there who can satisfy the right in the primaries and swing to the middle before election day?
Well, Jeb Bush, maybe Chris Christie, although he hasn't, I think if his record is scrutinized
He's
in
a
New Jersey,
liberal Northeast, well, relatively liberal Northeast Republican. Do you think he sells in the evangelical community?
I think it will not help Republican turnout, in November 2016 if Chris Christie's the nominee, unless he performs miraculously in the primary process, which I don't see happening. And so, I think that could hurt them, especially if it is Hillary Clinton. Just bringing out, more women to the polls, that really hurt Democrats on Tuesday this week. The fact that women didn't show up, the fact, of course, that minority voters didn't show up in as large numbers as they did for the presidential elections. So if it's Hillary Clinton versus some man in the Republican Party, I think, whoever it is, basically, that's going to be some advantage to Hillary just because of the gender difference.
There's also the issue, too, I think, if we look at it in a macro level, this election that just took place, I think, helps cement Hillary Clinton even more because there was a Republican conservative tone out there. So it really undercuts someone like O'Malley or any other liberal within the Democratic Party.
In that regard.
So what happens is she becomes sort of the de facto sort of capitalist conservative Democrat who's in the mainstream of society for many, not for all. But in a sense, she's going to be a very difficult candidate to be in a general election, and probably even more difficult in a primary.
All right, let's talk about the other big issue, which 4 states passed minimum wage increases. This is something that the president has talked about, income equality. There have been protests by McDonald's employees and other fast food chain workers. Do you think somewhere down the road the Republicans and Democrats tackle this? I know the Republicans don't want this at all, but there's a swell within the states that they want this.
The Democrats will, because every objective indicator, at least if you listen to the experts, suggests that the economy is improving.
Yes.
But the people don't believe it. And one of the reasons they don't believe it is because wages are stagnant and they don't see themselves moving ahead. And so as the Democrats look over the damage of this past election, I think they will learn that just spewing out statistics about unemployment being down and this being a little better doesn't work. What really works is what is being discussed around the kitchen table, and what's being discussed around the kitchen table is we're treading water, we're not earning money. Meantime, the upper echelons of society in the economic sectors are reaping millions and making huge amounts of money. So I think this is very promising territory for the Democratic Party. And I think Hillary Clinton, speaking of her, is a person who can speak to that. She appeals to blue-collar workers, to the lower sectors of the middle class. And if she can develop a proposal or a set of proposals or a plan that addresses that, I think she will have a very strong run in many states.
All right, Professor Davenport, let me throw this at you.
I agree.
How does a company like McDonald's, who clearly making billions of dollars, say to the worker who's on the front line, we can't raise your pay $2 or $3 because the hamburger will go up a nickel? I mean, how do they make that argument for me?
They really cannot. I mean, they have talking points against the minimum wage. They'll say, that it raises unemployment in the long run. They have sort of macroeconomic arguments that don't mean anything to people around the kitchen table. I think this is another issue that could hurt Republicans. Corporate tax reform, immigration, minimum wage, all of these issues are ones that speak to people who are going to make up the majority of the voters in the next presidential election. And they're Trojan horses, in a sense, for the Republican Party. Now that the Republicans have a majority in Congress, it's going to be incumbent on them to produce things. If they produce a minimum wage increase, which seems to me very unlikely to get through Congress, especially, I'm talking about a federal minimum wage increase here, that would really annoy the deepest parts of their base and a lot of their big donors. So I don't see that happening. But if it's blocked, the Democrats are going to run on that again and again. They will pound away at this issue in the presidential election in 2016. And so, this is what happens in our political system in general, is we swing to and fro, election to election, and what happens is that the party that has the majority of Congress really can't get anything done, and the voters get annoyed and think, well, maybe we'll try the other side.
And they keep going back and forth.
And no party can get anything done. So we have deep systematic problems in the whole system.
There was also no new agenda that was put forward in this election. Okay, it was sort of the same standard Republican issues that have a lot of support, particularly among the conservative Republicans. So this whole issue about what are the issues going to be in 2016, the economy is going to be big.
Let's talk about this minimum wage for a second. Economics 101, when I was in college, if you give money to the middle class, eventually it generates more business for everybody. What President Clinton used to say, a high tide raises all boats.
It's also the trickle-down theory. There's a lot of theories that come into play. But ultimately, as long as there's more workers chasing few jobs, they're going to have to accept lower wages because there's going to be somebody else to take the job. So that's why McDonald's can get away with what they do, because they can hire somebody else that wants that job at $7.25 an hour. There's going to be another person that's going to step up. The question is really one of equity and fairness. Okay, so is the person entitled to a standard of living that they should be able to expect to be able to live on, to be able to feed their family, to have a good house, to have heat, and all these other kinds of things. So it's an economic justice issue. It's not so much an economic issue per se. And I think that's really where we have to look at this.
Well, let's juxtapose this with that this was the most expensive midterm election ever. Millions, billions of dollars out there.
$4 billion.
$4 billion to be exact. A lot of it given by major corporations under the Citizens United ruling in the U.S. Supreme Court. What does that say to the average Joe? And I'll just throw this out here. Maybe if he's voting and he's saying, you know, I can never beat all that money. How can I get my message across? I'll just sit at home. Is that?
Yeah, this is a major problem for the system. You can see that in the reactions of ordinary people on the streets. They believe that elections are bought and sold. And until we can get control of the spending in campaigns, I think the cynicism will grow, and that will be dangerous for our democracy. Now, the Supreme Court has had a deaf ear to that. They have issued ruling after ruling basically saying that money is the equivalent of speech. I think that's an absurd equivalency. It's an absurd statement to make. Money is not speech. Money is a loudspeaker. And if you're talking about freedom of speech, we can control loudspeakers so that everybody can have their say. But if you say money is speech, then you can't control it. And I think that this is a basic error of the Supreme Court.
All right, we just have like a couple of minutes here, so let's put this to bed. Again, your reflections on this midterm election, what it means going forward in the next 2 years for both parties.
Well, I think what we're really looking at is a situation which is actually much more long-term even than 2016. You're looking at a situation where in our society over the last couple of years in particular, system legitimacy, a sense that you could really make a difference in society, has been undercut. Respect for authority has diminished. The connections to faith organizations has been undercut. You're really dealing with a situation where a lot of this is all about me and basically what I want to accomplish and how I'm going to succeed. And as a result, I think the Republicans are actually going to have a very hard time trying to regroup this idea that we can make a difference, because they've worked very hard to say the system doesn't work. Okay, the people that are leading shouldn't be respected. So I think what happens is there has to be kind of a transformation in the whole way we approach government and society.
That's a very good point for another show, possibly. A very good point. We have just a few seconds.
Speak to that. Yeah, I think that the deep systematic problems with the entire way that the federal government works need to be addressed, and this probably won't happen in the next 2 years. But I hope in the long run that there's a groundswell, a grassroots movement towards these kinds of reforms, constitutional amendments to deal with the problems the Supreme Court has created in Citizens United, constitutional amendments to deal with the gerrymandering of our districts, to deal with the way that our primary system works, to deal with the fact that we don't have runoff elections. So we have this crazy system where third-party candidates act as spoilers. We have so many problems in our system. I actually think we need probably a constitutional convention to deal with.
We're going to have to put that to bed right now, but the good news is we're going to go from substance to sublime in just a moment. We have the all-important, the very popular lightning round coming up. We're going to be talking about some lighter topics when we come back. Stick around.